the feeling in the air has changed because September is upon us. People are back to school. I'm in a new setting. I'm in my new home office. So this is the first time I've tested audio, visual, lights, everything. And there's a different feeling in the air. There's a lot going on in the world right now. And when the seasons change, the planet, I always believe this, the planet goes through a cycle that is reflected inside the human body. I do believe that these cycles of change bring opportunities for upgrades to our physiology. A lot of people are experiencing challenges with their immune systems as the seasons change because the processes inside the body are changing. We're coming out of that summer growth, high energy state. We're moving into the fall, which is that transition point into the winter regenerative metabolism. Just as the earth goes through its seasons, the body does. And this is why cyclical things happen within the body, and they really nicely coincide with what it is we do for our features, given what it is we want to talk about, because anything and everything with the immune system gets challenged when there's a big seasonal change. That can be a small thing, someone becoming more susceptible to the flu bug or the cold bug that their kids bring home from school, to wanting to do somewhat of a post-summer cleansing immune regenerative program. Uh, Everyone I know where I live is going through some sort of viral, bacterial, pathogenic thing right now. So I'm very fortunate that I'm keeping my immune system up. And let's hope that I have not spoken too soon, which I don't think I have, because thankfully I typically have a pretty strong immune system. So I'm going to get my screen shared here. We're going to dive into some fun stuff today. And you all know my definition of fun. My definition of fun is talking about science. So I'm going to put myself away. I'm going to move over the toolbar so I can share my slideshow. And we're going to get into something that I've been craving to do for quite some time. We're doing more of a scientific lecture today. It's more of a deep dive. And we're talking about how to support your immune system in general, and contextually we'll delineate between acute seasonal immune influences all the way up to something that may be more heavy clinical chronic degenerative in nature, because all conditions where the body is suboptimal are issues or conditions of the immune system. And understanding how the immune system plays its role, or whatever role we can decipher that it plays in these scenarios, will allow us to become more effective clinicians to help the people who are coming to us ultimately to be guided in terms of how to use products and devise strategies for getting better. So whenever I think of the immune system, I think of these little cute critters because I want to make everything as accessible and less intimidating as possible. But fundamentally, the immune system is the surveillance system of the body, and it's also the private security. I've said this before in lectures, and I think it's a really important soundbite to remember for yourself and understanding, the why behind sometimes people getting sick. It's the body's conscious decision, because the immune system is the only system in the body that can heal you or hurt you. Most other systems in the body are communication systems. They're processing systems, like the digestive system is a processing and absorption system. The circulatory system is a delivery and removal system, oxygen, carbon dioxide. The digestive system is a processing and absorption system, but the immune system is the one that will help to regulate and regenerate all of the systems in the body should they come under threat. And immunology is also quite complicated depending upon how you want to look at it, because there's a lot of moving parts within the immune system that we really have to understand at a fundamental principle if we're going to become effective at knowing how to strategize approaching dealing with a certain aspect of immune presentation in a client, or maybe understanding the difference between a Th1 response versus a Th2 response. How does an adaptable immune issue present itself clinically versus an innate immune issue? And to get into the immune system, we have to understand the physiologic core of where the immune system not resides in the body, because the immune system is absolutely everywhere. The principal site of the immune cell concentration in the body is actually in the gut. We've talked about that, and it makes perfect sense. If I call the gut an absorption system, then anything coming through the gut is going into the body. If something is going into the body, it could be beneficial, food, vitamins, nutrition, or it could be detrimental, microorganisms, toxins, environmental compounds. So the body has these specific key areas where concentrations of immune cells are there from a surveillance perspective. A lot of people have suffer with chronic ENT, ears, nose, throat things. We have a highly, highly concentrated area of immune activity in the adenoids and tonsils. And unfortunately, taking adenoids and tonsils out nowadays is pretty much the go-to when there's chronic issues and infection there. I cannot tell you how many people I've clinically counseled with who, when they tell me they have head and neck problems, they have chronic upper respiratory or issues with the throat, I asked them if they had a lot of strep throat as a kid because that is usually a causative factor for downstream issues with tonsils and adenoids. We have the thymus, we have the T cell education center. You can think of the thymus as the university for your adaptive immune system, where T cells get differentiated and they become specific kinds of T cells. We have the lymphatic system, which is where a lot of the garbage that is detoxified from the body gets processed and transported before it's detoxified out of the body. We have the bone marrow, which essentially generates the hemopoietic stem cells that become differentiated immune cells. We have lymph nodes beyond the lymphatic system. The nodes are where there's a high concentration of innate and adaptive immune cells and a lot of processing of microbes and viruses and various things that the body needs to disassemble safely happen in the lymph nodes, which is why if someone has chronic lymph node inflammation, their body is likely dealing with some kind of chronic immune stress. We have the spleen, which has both red pulp and white pulp, some of which breaks down things like red blood cells. Others helps to generate and educate different kinds of innate and adaptive immune cells. And then we have our Peyer's patches in our small intestines, which are essentially the specialized immune cells where a lot of the dendrites, the dendritic cells, which sense and determine what's friend or foe before they come into the body reside. And then we have our appendix, another thing that gets taken out, which is actually an important area to not only house microbes, but also there's a lot of immune activity because it's close to the ileocecal valve where things from the small intestine are entering into the colon. So knowing the fundamental aspects of the anatomy will also allow you to understand if someone's presenting certain kinds of deficiencies from a symptomatology perspective, or if they're presenting deficiencies that may show up on a blood panel when you see neutrophil, basophils, when you look at various specialty tests for looking at Th1 versus Th2 dominance, it all comes back to this. All cells of the immune system come from a basic hemopoietic stem cell, which is a fun word to say. And then they differentiate to the different branches of the immune system, which we're going to go into. You have the adaptive immune system, which we'll explain is the one that essentially is always learning and becoming more educated as we move through life. And we have the innate immune system, which is the one that's given to us. So we have a fighting chance as a new organism to be able to keep ourselves safe in a world that is very different from the very protective, or possibly protective, depending upon the environmental of exposure of mom. But generally speaking, the protection of the amniotic sac and the fluid inside is far less toxic than standing in the middle of downtown New York City, being chronically exposed to environmental toxins and God only knows what else is in the air that we can't see. So the formation of our immune systems is actually rather intricate. It's incredibly, incredibly beautifully designed that everything has its place in a very linear projection. What I mean by a linear projection is there are steps in the process that are dependent upon the previous step to be well developed so the next step can be optimized. So it really starts with mom. There's a few things that are given to us from mom and dad. There are a few things that are given to us only from mom from the perspective of metabolic function and microbial influence, those come directly from mom. So, in some ways, the adaptive immune response is much more tied to the mom's overall health and pregnancy based upon the mom's immune system and how her diet and the crosstalk between the fetus and the mom are ultimately going to establish that baseline of innate immunity. The birthing process, which we've talked about a lot, has a massive influence. The ability of the baby to be born naturally and inoculated by the mom's vaginal microbes versus a C-section will influence things, as will early life antibiotic exposure. And all of these things, again, will be causing influences or stimuli that the immune system is going to have to adapt to on the fly. Then there's the process of lactation and feeding. Breast milk is the perfect food for humans. It's got the right quantities of macronutrients. It's got these really specialized fibers called milk oligosaccharides, which are there to help build the microbes that eventually crosstalk with the immune cells, specifically bifidobacterium, which we've talked about, are so vitally important, which is why they're such a focal point in our probiotic formulations. But the early lactation, the colostrum, the delivery of immune cells in high concentrations directly post-birth is probably the single greatest influence of establishing a healthy immune system in an infant. And during infancy, it's a question of introduction of solid foods, the exposures that children have to the environment around them. Are they able to interact with animals? Are they able to interact with nature? And if that is something that is done in an appropriate way, you'll notice a child's tendency is to sample the world not just by looking at the world, but they touch things and they put their hands in their mouth and they lick things that God only knows why, but the immune system is actually trying to educate itself through the baby because a small amount of stress is actually the hormetic stress that the immune system wants. And as we move through life, we become finalized, fully grown beings as adults. And there's this constant dance between our internal environment of our physiology and the external environment it experiences that ultimately influences where our immune system goes as it relates to the ability to keep us free from disease or unfortunately to develop disease because all aspects of disease development, especially chronic degeneration, inflammatory conditions, all the way up to the most extreme manifestations of disease, are very much immune driven. And we start life as an innate immune dominant being. We become more so an adaptive immune dominant being as we get older because every day is a new day and there is no predictable nature to our realities in terms of what our body's going to experience other than what reality brings us, if that makes sense. And the design of this is incredible. It is really about developing the ultimate communication in the security system. So, as I did mention, we become an innate dominant being because as we're born, we have a fully functional innate immune system. And what that innate immune system does is it has pre-programmed aspects of activity that it knows to directly intervene with. The innate immune system's job is to appropriately respond and then recruit the adaptive immune system to then teach the adaptive immune system how to act and how to memorize things. The innate immune system has no memory, but the adaptive immune system is the one that uses specialized cells called B and T cells to learn patterns of things so that the next time the body experiences potential threat or infection, it already has the programming of knowing what to do. It's like, oh, this is chickenpox. Well, I've had this before. So rather than have a full-blown outbreak of chickenpox, I'm going to squash the herpes zoster virus in its tracks, and it's not going to manifest as a disease because that's the memory of the adaptive immune system. The idea is that these two work in tandem together so that you have an early communication through the innate immune system that can organize and communicate the adaptive immune system the proper instructions in order to recruit the proper cells to deal with the threat and then to resolve the issue and go back down to baseline. And you can think of the immune system as having a memory index or a Rolodex of things. And that's what the memory response really is. And when it comes to the immune system, there is no more important relationship when it comes to not only the early life education, also the long-term development than the gut immune system axis. They say it's about 60%. Again, it's an approximation, and every individual is different. But I did mention that most immune cells are residing in the gut because that's the surveillance system. You're wanting to make sure that all of the things that are coming into the body are being categorized as appropriate, healthful, and safe. Whereas if things are coming in through the digestive system that are being ingested, external bacteria, viral infections, environmental compounds, you can stop it before it gets systemic. But the problem here is when things change dynamically in the gut. And what I mean by dynamically is the health of the gut breaks down, the microbiome in and of itself, the populations of microbes become compromised, so they become potentially pathogenic, then the chaos can ensue because the communication or the healthy relationship between the microbes talking to the immune cells breaks down. And the key to any good relationship is communication. When you have poor communication, you oftentimes have hostility. So the microbes are there to help educate immune cells and they have conversations back and forth. But the key is if they interact too aggressively or in too close proximity, an inflammatory response on the part of the immune system can initiate a local issue within the gut. And we've talked about leaky gut can perpetuate long-term chronic degenerative disease development based upon the fact that if the gut is diseased, if the immune system becomes hypervigilant, what starts as a local problem in the gut quickly becomes a systemic problem because anything getting into the circulatory system past the gut layer of epithelial and mucosal lining becomes a problem because the blood circulates through the body very, very quickly. And in a matter of a few minutes, blood that was in your gut will return back to that same site in your gut because the circulatory system of the body is highly efficient. So we have to understand that knowing these aspects of the immune system, understanding there are different divisions of it and each have their different responses, there is clinical presentation that can help you if that is your specialty with what you want to focus on, be it cancer, be it autoimmunity, be it degenerative conditions. But what I typically think is most issues that come up in people are as a result of adaptive immune dysfunction because there's some issues in terms of the communication or the immune system has become confused and you either have a hypervigilant or a hyper suppressed response of the adaptive immune system, which means the innate immune system can't silence itself. To distinguish the two, just remember these few things. The innate immune system is determined by the genetic potential of mom and dad. So there is some degree of influence if mom or dad was highly susceptible to seasonal allergies, to catching colds, things of that nature. That may be an influence in the person who has parents who have certain characteristics. The innate immune system are the cells that act immediately in a very pre-programmed way. It's the fast response, and the goal of all cells of the innate immune system is a direct neutralization. If you run a comprehensive blood panel and you look at a complete blood count and a white blood cell count, you'll see things like I call them the Phil brothers, neutrophil, eosinophil, basophil. Those are the innate immune cells, and you can get some insights based upon how someone's innate immunity is functioning based upon the counts on a blood panel. And these are either going to directly neutralize a threat because either a macrophage or a dendritic cell has taken what's called an antigen. It's a sample of the material of a potential issue, and it brings it to the appropriate cell. So if it's a viral infection, one of them will engage. If it's a bacterial or a fungal infection, a different one will engage. And that's really what the innate immune system is trying to do. It's trying to directly neutralize or it's trying to recruit the addition of the adaptive immune response because it's so much more powerful and it has memory. The adaptive immune cells are really about the B cells and the T cells, so the ones that make antibodies or the ones that typically make cytokines. These are the ones that have the ability to direct the full-blown assault on taking all of the body's energetic immune resources and directing them directly at the potential threat, and then remembering that threat for the next time, as I said. So this immune system develops through experience and education, and it's understanding those patterns and committing those patterns to memory. And the goal of the adaptive immune system, it has to be vigilant enough to organize the appropriate response so it knows how to intervene. But when things are calm again, it has to silence itself. That's the job of what's called a T regulatory cell. And when the immune system is unable to do that because of some sort of immune dysfunction, communication issue, chronic stimuli coming from an unknown source, this is when we see people present with immune-like issues on an acute level, which could be, chronic sinusitis, low-level inflammatory responses, all the way to full-blown autoimmune conditions. Something in the dance of these two back and forth gets very much compromised. And I put this up here for anyone who's going to keep these slides. This is a really good way of determining the differences between the innate and the adaptive immune systems, because understanding these will also help you become much more accurate at reading lab results or even running some specific functional lab tests. But this is, understanding the fundamental nature of our innate immune system is compromised in a variety of ways. Specifically speaking, the innate immune system's main compromise is the inability to clear an infection. directly. It can't directly clear an infection, which is why it recruits the adaptive immune system. And if we have acute and long-term chronic innate immune issues, then we have a downregulation of these fast-acting cells in terms of their ability to intervene, but also the quantities. If you ever look at someone's complete blood cell count and they have an incredibly low level of basophils, neutrophils, eosinophils, then the assumption is they may not have enough of an innate immune response to deal with a potential infection. Conversely, if the body has an incredibly high amount of these things, it typically indicates that there is some sort of active infection, and the practitioner needs to delineate between what would cause an eosinophil to be high versus what would cause a neutrophil to be high, and what kind of microbe or microorganism might be present in the body that the body doesn't have the ability to clear. An adaptive immune response being compromised is more about the appropriateness of the response to a stimuli. So, if we have a weak adaptive immune system, which could be as a result of a multitude of influences, number one could be nutritional deficiencies, number two could be environmental stresses or dietary stresses. Most oftentimes, when someone's highly stressed themselves psychologically and emotionally, that downregulates the immune system. So, that's when someone can typically have a flare up of a long held viral or bacterial pathogen. And the other side is when the action of the adaptive immune system doesn't know how to appropriately modulate the responses. It doesn't know how to calm things down. And we've talked about things like the NF-kappa B response and the chronic inflammatory cytokine storm. This is a scenario where someone's adaptive immune system is going haywire because for some reason it doesn't believe that the threat has been neutralized. So it's only trying to respond appropriately to deal with the threat so the body can activate the healing process, which inflammation is supposed to be the first step of healing, but long held chronic inflammation is the first step, unfortunately, of degeneration. So we hear the term a lot. How do you boost your immune system? Like, what does that even mean? Well, it's a fun marketing term that people use to sell products at gas station checkouts. Immune boosting shots. You take these herbs. Me being me, I like to delineate wordplay because to me, language matters. If I say boost the immune system, or someone rather says that to me, my response is going to be innate or adaptive. How do you know it's boosting? Is boosting good or is suppressing good? Do you want to modulate instead? So I like clearing up a lot of these misconceptions because fundamentally, there's not one thing that boosts an immune system. There's not one thing, well, there's probably one thing that suppresses an immune system, that's chronic stress, but there's not a predictable pattern in each person because each person's immune system is unique to them. And the sum total of the influences and the sum total of the effects that that person is subjecting their immune system to is ultimately going to determine if they get better or they get stuck in this healing crisis that we call the cell danger response. So to me, boosting immunity could be in a variety of different ways. One could be restoring a loss of tolerance. This could be someone who develops a food sensitivity or some sort of long-held food allergy. And over time, they've been healing their gut, they've been modulating their microbiome, they've been eliminating certain trigger foods on the diet, and they have been enhancing their health overall. That person can restore tolerance to what was lost because the immune system became dysregulated. The other is restoring an inappropriate response. If someone has been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, it does not mean that for the rest of their lives, they're going to be an inflammatory mess where that disease presentation is. You can silence a flare up in an autoimmune presentation, which to me is restoring an inappropriate response that the body has lost the ability to decipher. Sometimes you can restore a fundamental deficiency or weakness. Someone takes an antibiotic, and then all of a sudden they have much greater susceptibility to having digestive issues. Well, if they've wiped out key bacteria that modulate and regulate the immune response in the gut, then that can become a deficiency or a weakness. If someone has been on a kind of diet where they've become very nutritionally restricted for a long period of time, and they're missing vitamin A or they're missing vitamin D or vitamin C, again, if you replete those nutrients, you can restore a fundamental weakness or deficiency. And then there's the restoring the appropriate communication, which again can be a nutritional thing. it can be an environmental thing, and then we can subcategorize adaptive dysfunction and an innate dysfunction. And those usually take a little bit more deep testing to look at how the body is responding to things in a given moment of time. For me, this is how I look at things. Compromised immune function is directly correlated to overall health status, recovery status, so our adaptability, our overall stress load, how much energy is our body consuming just trying to get through life, and the amount of extra energy the body has available. The immune system is an incredibly energy hungry system. And because it's arguably the deepest held important system to the body, meaning it's the only one that can heal us, if someone's overall energy levels are low, I believe that the immune system will be given priority to help deal with the threat at the expense of other body systems. But over time, as the person loses overall energy and vitality, they lose immune function in the context of the ability of the immune system to mount an appropriate response, followed by the ability of an immune system to mount a strong enough response. So, to boost immunity, we have to look at it through a variety of different ways. First, what do you need to remove? How do you remove the triggers and how do you downregulate the stressors? Because a lot of people don't realize how many things they're doing on a regular basis that are actually driving the stress that the immune system is simply responding to. Second is we have to look at the presentation of immune deficiency and what does that person individually present is where testing comes in. Once we've determined the first two and we've made an assessment, or if you can, a diagnosis, if that's within your purview of profession, then you have to devise a support plan because most of these things are going to be slow regenerative processes that are underpinned by diet and lifestyle influences, which people don't want to hear, but the body will only regenerate as fast as the physiology is able. And then to be specific and to be strategic, you have to create a supplement-based protocol and you have to pick your products based upon understanding the action reaction interface of the product and the physiology. Because the homeostasis of the immune system is driven by a multitude of things that are interdependent. This graphic so beautifully explains how everything from the body has the ability to positively or negatively influence the immune system. And when all of these things are thrown off, it's why it's so difficult to pinpoint the original cause or the thing that's absolutely driving the person's chaos, because oftentimes it is always multifactorial. So you have to work to find the drivers of deficiency, we have to understand these points of connection. You know, for someone, it may be chronic HPA axis activation, which is depleting the body's adaptability because they're using so much cortisol, which is dysregulating their metabolic processes, which is weakening their immune response, which is compromising their gut and the body's ability to nourish itself, and downregulating the ability to maintain a healthy microbiome. For someone else, it could be a circadian issue where they're a night shift worker and they just get sick every time someone else gets sick because their circadian rhythm is totally dysregulated. This is where the art of client and patient care really becomes paramount because you have to understand the person's patterns beyond just looking at blood panels and fancy lab tests. If you do want to look at lab testing, there are a couple really cool things you can do. A comprehensive blood panel is fantastic. The more deep and detailed you can make it while understanding the information to make it useful for your client is wonderful. And I do like looking at some of the specific labs from Cyrex Labs. They have certain arrays that are specific to different aspects of the immune system. You have adaptive panels, you have a lymphocyte panel, you have microbial and a fungal burden test. So these are some of the things you can look into a little bit more deeply if you want to get a greater picture of what's going on with someone. But I will say, just as a caveat, a lab test is a moment in time, and person's physiology is always in a dynamic homeostasis of trying to find its balance. So again, useful information, but not absolute law. So that was our little background in understanding the immune system. I think those things are fundamental because the greater your understanding of the patterns and the overall scaffolding or the framework of how a system is set up in terms of its design, the better you can be strategic to know how to pair a product given the influence of a supplement and what the supplement can do for the person's body. So when we have compromised immunity, we can't just talk about it through lab tests and high lymphocytes, low lymphocytes. We also have to grade what it is we're dealing with because for some people, they just don't want to get sick every fall or winter. For other people, they have severe issues that they keep bouncing around practitioners from person to person to try to see and to solve. So to me, low-level issues are acute things that come and go, whereas severe chronic issues are what pushes someone into a state where their overall vitality is compromised and ultimately it risks mortality of non-natural causes likely before it's time for them. So how do you build a supplement strategy specifically for the immune system? Here's the first question I ask. How does the product affect the immune system? If I'm taking a probiotic versus a systemic enzyme versus an herbal nutritional formulation, how do those products, specifically through their ingredients and formulations, exert an effect on the immune system? And is that what I want? The second question is, where does it, as the product, fit into the protocol strategy? If I know that someone has an infection and I want to help their immune system, I might not want to give them something that will upregulate inflammation too quickly because they may not be strong enough. Or if someone is actually nutritionally deficient, before I want to go push the immune system with something, I might want to restore nutritional adequacy first. The third thing is how do I determine dosing and duration? This is something we'll talk about towards the end, which I can maybe help guide. But again, you can't build the dosing and duration for the person that hasn't been seen yet. You have to assess the person, and based upon how they evolve through the process with you, you can determine those variables. And the last question is how do I pair other products in a synergistic way? I mean, ideally, most people would just go, well, let's just give them all the immune products. That might be too much for the person. Or there may be things in the immune system that you either want to focus on first or don't focus on first. So we have to understand that it is an art form, and you can't neglect the organs of immunity and understanding where someone may be presenting that issue. Sometimes a disease presentation is because of a thymic deficiency. Sometimes there's chronic tonsillitis where someone's, chronically making tonsil stones or they have chronic postnasal drip. That may be where the area of effect is, but it might need some other strategy in the digestive system, for example, to help clear the thing that may be presenting itself in the throat, the ears, the nose, and the tonsils. So we're going to go into the products that we've selected for this wonderful topic. First thing, the modern Westerners' most highly correlated deficiency. Vitamin D is kind of hormone-like in its effect. So yes, it's called a vitamin. It is a fat-soluble vitamin, and most of the developed world is vitamin D deficient because we are in getting it from the sun. Vitamin D is a modulator of the immune system. Typically speaking, the reality that people experience during vitamin D deficiency is immune deficiency because without adequate levels of vitamin D, the innate and the adaptive immune cells cannot respond appropriately to when an infection threat is present. And if you look at what the research says, most vitamin D deficiencies are correlated with increased risk of infection, autoimmune diseases, and because vitamin D is such an easy supplement to take and getting in the sun specifically at different times of day at different latitudes is not necessarily easy. Doing a high dose vitamin D, monitoring it as you're doing it over the course of 3, 6, 9, 12 months is one of the best widespread therapeutic benefits for those struggling with immune deficiency. You can see here from perspective of how it influences things. Vitamin D has the ability to do a few things within the immune system. So first and foremost, it has the ability to influence the adaptive immune system's ability to make more antibodies appropriately. It has the ability to influence how T cell responses are differentiated, meaning do you want a Th1 or Th2 upregulated response? And then do you want a T regulatory downregulated response? It helps dendritic cell maturation, which is basically the specific immune cell that scans and presents all the potential threats to the adaptive immune system. And it also helps with macrophage differentiation. And macrophage in Latin is big eater. These are the cells that gobble up all the garbage that would otherwise cause a bit of a toxicity response once the threat has been neutralized. And it has the ability to upregulate certain productions of cytokines. And the thing that's different about our vitamin D compared to other things on the market is the high quality source is usually cholecalciferol is from lanolin sheep's wool, but we pair it with an enzyme blend that has a synergistic effect, not too different from something like a Therazyme or another proteolytic enzyme, in down regulating, if taken on an empty stomach, can down regulate the energetic activation of the immune system, and when taken with food can serve as a digestive aid. So you get a dose of vitamin D, plus you get some digestive support to help maximize the absorption of the vitamin D. I, I personally like taking vitamin D. Any fat soluble vitamin with food are not digested as water soluble are. They're not going through the epithelial lining. They get into lymphatic circulation before they get into circulatory. So that is the most important thing there. Then there's looking at Therazyme. Therazyme for me is immune clearing support. So this is our flagship product. It's also an NSF, sorry, an informed sport certified product. So if anyone is working with young athletes or they have the desire to want to make sure that you have the highest quality from a purity testing certification, this product did pass with flying colors. But Therazyme is a combination of all of our 10, I believe, proteolytic enzymes. And what they do is they act on specific body systems to help lower what's called immune activation processes. The immune system, as I said, needs a lot of energetic support in order to make sure that all the immune cells have the adequate energy to do their job. So these enzymes, when taken appropriately on an empty stomach, are conserved. They're not used for the purpose of digestion. They are in fact transported across the gut barrier into the circulatory system. They hitch rides on these specialized protein carriers, these alpha 2 go deeper into understanding the mechanism, delivered to the sites of need and specific based upon the kind of enzyme it is. So if it's serrapeptidase, it goes to a specific area in the body that has an affinity for that. Nattokinase, protease, what have you, and they operate at different pH ranges. So they cover all the physiologic aspects of where they may need to be most functional within the body to help the immune system out. There's an example of something that where if you take, for example, serratiopeptidase, you have the ability to downregulate the the likelihood of severe infection of certain strains of bacteria because what the serratiopeptidase or the serrapeptidase does is it reduces the viability of infection by disassembling the amyloid proteins and the biofilms that the bacteria use to essentially hide and veil themselves from the immune system. This is really where proteolytic enzymes shine. When we have infections in the body, specifically bacterial infections, these organisms develop strategy because they want to live. They want to live, procreate, and they want a place to reside. So when an infection is long held in the body, the immune system is unable to deal with the infection, typically when a biofilm has been formed by the cooperation of multiple pathogenic organisms or high quantities of a potentially single pathogenic strain. Biofilm is kind of like a protective shield that the immune system can't penetrate. But when you add enzymes to the body, the enzymes can help disassemble or dissolve the biofilm so that the bacterial infection becomes exposed to the immune system, and the immune system can actually intervene now and help the body clear up and resolve the infection. Then there's Theralac Pro, and we're going to talk about the two different probiotics that I think really fit into this. To me, Theralac Pro is the other flagship again, another informed sport product. So not only does it have the ability to be used in all aspects of professionally sanctioned sports without worrying about banned substances, but it ensures that the product is free of all kinds of contaminants because you want clean products if you're going to use products. So to me, The immune modulation effect of Theralac Pro is really interesting because it has an influence over cytokine modification. Cytokines are chemical signals that the immune system uses to mount an appropriate response. It has the ability to deal with potential colonization of pathogens. It has the ability to competitively exclude pathogens while colonizing themselves to help anchor the innate commensal bacteria of the microbiome. And that mechanism is what helps the body find consistency in the profile of microbes to push the body out of a state of dysbiosis. From an immune perspective, this is actually directly from the research that we have on Theralac Pro. Theralac has the ability to modulate the immune system. So modulation is a word that means it can go up or it can go down. It can autocorrect based upon what the body wants. In some cases, if there is an infection, you want an inflammatory response. So the specific cytokines that certain strains of microbes in Theralac produce can generate an appropriate response so the immune system can prevent an infection from taking hold in the body. However, if that infection has been cleared, you also want the ability to upregulate the counter-regulatory cytokines, the anti-inflammatory regulating cytokines, so that the body can downregulate its adaptive immune response, and you can go back to a baseline of the immune system being there to deal with a potential threat should one come in. So you have the inflammatory response with the anti-inflammatory resolution of said response. And this is done through the modulation of how the microbes communicate with the immune system at the level of the microbiome, specifically the epithelial cell in the mucosal lining. So this is why this is so interesting. For someone who is a healthy individual and they want to maintain healthy immunity, which we talked about last month with travel, I think that was last month, we're all blending together. This would be a good probiotic to take when there is nothing going on. If there is an initial insult, an infection, something that comes into the body via the gut, you may want to use this as a way to actually raise the immune system's ability to deal with the threat. And then once that's been dealt with, you can bring the dose down, possibly take a break, or use one as a twice a week, thrice a week supplement formula on an ongoing basis to have the ability to deal with what comes in. And I like to pair Theralac Pro with Immunozyme or any of our products specifically for the immune system with Immunozyme because to me, this is an immune system multivitamin. Fat-soluble multivitamins specifically tend to be players in immune function where water-soluble typically seem to be more important for metabolic processes and energy. We've already talked about vitamin D and its ability to modulate both divisions. And we have vitamin A's ability to influence T regulatory cell ability for the mucosal lining and the mucosal integrity. So there's a lot of the immune cells that live in the mucosal proteins and the antibody production. So this way the adaptive immune can increase its database of memory. And then you have vitamin K, which also has a little less well, again, very important effects within the immune system, specifically upregulating T cell activity, again, adaptive immune response, cytokine activity response, and antioxidant responses. And then the form rounding it out has combinations of green tea extract, alpha lipoic acid, and specific probiotics, all to help induce T regulatory cell function. And to try to make this one really quick, and so the T regulatory cells are essentially when the bouncers come in the bar. A fight breaks out, and you have everyone trying to vie for control of the fight, and then all of a sudden the huge bouncers come in and they neutralize the fight. They kick the people out who started the fight, and then everyone in the club goes back to having a good time. That's kind of what the T regulatory cells do. They downregulate the Th1, Th2, Th17 responses, which can be pro-inflammatory. And they also downregulate the B cell response, which can be excessively inflammatory if excess antibodies are produced. So they suppress the immune system in a healthy way and are typically deficient in people's diets because beta carotene that you from orange vegetables isn't quite preformed vitamin A. Vitamin D, plant plant-based foods in the form of E2 is not the same thing. So if someone is on a modified diet, that could really be something where a low-hanging fruit is repleting the deficiencies that the person's experiencing. And then there's ivermectin, which, right now mast cell activation is a thing a lot of people are talking about. And mast cell activation, to me, patternistically, is just highly vigilant, potentially inappropriate immune response because the immune system is chronically primed. So quercetin has the ability to modulate the immune system through a couple different pathways. Number one, the Th17 pathway, which is typically associated with autoimmune responses. So when someone's in a chronic flare-up, quercetin might be a great target there. It has the ability to help influence the production of anti-inflammatory cytokines. So someone dealing with a chronic inflammatory issue, quercetin may be a useful adjunct there. And it can regulate the balance between Th1, Th2 dominance, which is where the innate and the immune system, the adaptive immune systems become a little dysregulated. Again, quercetin could be something there that is possibly beneficial to more so regulate and modulate the immune system properly so that whatever the person's upregulated symptoms are, the body can start to ease itself down a little bit. The deeper you dig into quercetin, it really has the ability to seemingly chill the immune system out. There's a silencing, down regulating effect. And those effects are typically associated with things that, symptomatology wise, are influenced by mast cell activation, respiratory constrictions, panic attacks, vasoconstriction of the circulatory systems. So, quercetin is really a powerful boost when potentially adding it to nutritional profile. And because of isoquercetin's unique, I guess, biochemical makeup, stacked with vitamin C, the efficacy of ISO-Q is dramatically better than most off-the-shelf quercetins. So this is something that I've actually used very beneficially for myself. The last house I lived in, I didn't realize that there was a lot of mold. And I didn't know that while I was taking this, but when I stopped taking quercetin, I noticed a slight bit increased congestion. So this is a product I think a lot of people could benefit from. It's something that you can use on an ongoing in our environments are not necessarily there to help our home near the water. It's an interesting probiotic, basically what the formulation's intention is. Whereas Theralac Pro, True Bifido, and True Flora Pro are very much targeted to small intestine, large intestine systemic coverage and their ability to modulate immunity or lactic acid production. Bioenzyme is really more about diversity. And in this case, we're talking about microbe diversity because the research shows that the greater the diversity in the microbiome, the greater the microbiome's ability to tolerate deviations from norm, and the greater diversity typically correlates with a healthier gut immune axis response. And we know that based upon the research, correlations between the development of certain disease profiles and the profile of gut bacteria shows that a less diverse microbiome typically correlates with a greater likelihood of developing chronic degenerative conditions. So it's really the balance between how do the commensals influence and interact with the immune system versus how do the pathogens influence and interact with the immune system. This is the only product where the serving size is actually 2 capsules if you want the full dose, but you do not need to use the full dose. And we've talked about this with other probiotics. There's nothing to say that you need to use a full dose every day. You can do a single capsule of Bioenzyme and still get the benefits of enhancing microbial diversity, but that might be someone who's just wanting to maintain gut health or someone coming off of a course of antibiotics, then dovetail down to a more maintenance dose. Because fundamentally, when the pathogens are starting to outcrowd the commensals, the pathogen immune system. Whereas when the commensals are keeping everything, shall we say, on the microbiome, the immune system can respond appropriately, and the default state of vigilance and immune activation is dramatically lower. And then we have Czyme, another one of our incredible products that does not, because a lot of people don't think of it as a go-to product for a couple of reasons. One, um, before COVID, respiratory health wasn't all that important for most people. Number two, this is a product that's had most of its glory overseas, specifically in Japan and other parts of Europe. Czyme's affinity is for breaking biofilms and typically speaking has an affinity for the respiratory mucosal lining. So it functions kind of in a similar way to an anti-inflammatory and is a mucolytic agent where it helps to thin out mucus. So if something is trapped in the mucosal respiratory system, giving someone chronic respiratory infections or issues, if the mucus is too thick, you can't expectorate that mucus. Expectorate is get rid of. So it acts as a way to thin the mucus so the mucus is actually able to be coughed up. And if you ever have some sort of chest infection, you cough up yellow or green, you're legitimately coughing out the stimuli and the infection that has inhabited your body. And the airway is something that's very important for two reasons. If we look at how a respiratory or an olfactory, that's the nasal cavity, the epithelial lining is constructed, they're very similar to the digestive system. This is the best graphic I could find, so please disregard the drug molecule at the top. This is just for the physical graphic here. So you have a mucosal lining, you have tight junctions, you have goblet cells to make mucus, you have epithelial cells, and below that you have entry points into the body via the circulatory system. And in the olfactory upper ENT area, you actually have direct transit to the cerebrospinal fluid and to the brainstem and the blood-brain barrier. Most people don't realize that chronic respiratory and ENT infections, not only can they enter the bloodstream very easily because the blood goes to the lungs to get reoxygenated, but it can become a systemic problem that also gets through the blood-brain barrier and becomes an immune system problem because of the proximity to key fragile organs in the body. Also, if you are mucousy in the olfactory area and you're producing a lot of postnasal drip and you swallow that, that goes directly into your digestive system. So you're essentially bringing infection from one area of the body to the other, which is probably by design in terms of how the infection wants to get into your system. So those are the different products that I think highlighting their key features, benefits, and aspects of how they work in the body can give you a really good indication of how to build product protocols based upon the area of the physiology you wish to interact with or how you want to use a product given what it does in the body for the person who might need it. And then you have to look at the other things that we always talk about. If someone's dealing with chronically weakened immunity, what are the daily triggers, the things that we do every day that we don't necessarily realize are compromising us? Excessive use of stimulants, sugar consumption can depress immunity, specifically directly after high quantities of simple sugar ingestion, exposure to toxic environmental compounds, artificial scents, cleaners in your house that are petrochemical based specifically, common pollution, believe it or not, phototoxicity, cheap blue dominant lights. This is why using things like hedron glasses in the evening is actually a way to help regulate your circadian rhythm, which regulates how your immune system functions because there's a daily rhythm to the immune system based upon what's called a biorhythm. Excessive EMF stress, the frequencies coming off of certain devices can weaken the energetic field of the body, which will downregulate the available energy for the immune system. And just simple lack of rest and recovery time, not prioritizing sleep recovery in favor of doing too much activity all the time. And the lifestyle strategies to support immunity are all not that much different from things we've spoken about before, but you want to focus on making sure that the cleansing effects of the body, the nutritional adequacy of the body, and taking time to downregulate your sympathetic nervous system and get your body moving, it's so important because these are the things that really help heal the body. The products are the catalysts to help shore up weak areas biochemically, but it's the product protocols paired with health promoting lifestyle strategies that are really the things that do the big changes over the course of weeks, months, if not years. And we've actually come up with what I call a good starting point. This is our respiratory immune support protocol. And again, it's a starting point for someone who's maybe asking, well, how do I start in terms of supporting someone's immune system? And we have two different approaches with the same four products out of the portfolio. There's a standard dose, which, from a perspective of the degree of effect it's going to have on the body, it's going to be always lesser in terms of how much stress it may put upon the body if it starts some sort of an immune modulating or detoxing effect. Or if someone is well versed in this kind of stuff, you can just take the same protocol and you can increase the dosage. The standard dose, besides being quite effective for maintaining immune health, if you look at some of the products, if you're taking one capsule a day of a product with 93 capsules, that's a 3 month supply. And even at a therapeutic dose, which is typically more so given under the guide of a practitioner, you're still getting a month long, if not more, quantity out of each bottle with a powerful synergistic effect, in this case, of nutritional repletion, vitamin D, microbiome diversity anchoring in the form of bioenzyme, respiratory, I guess, emphasis with Czyme, and the systemic benefits of using the other proteolytic enzymes when taken on an empty stomach in order to maximize the effect of how the body can use the effects of these products to maximize the immune system's ability to clear house, get the body out of stress and threat, hopefully get back to a calm baseline. So with that, everyone, that is that is what we have today. And